This is my first time in Brasilia, but it is not my first time in Brazil. Every time I come to this country, I see all the beauty, and I see all the people, and I very much like speaking to as many Brazilians as possible, but I will have to tell you, I speak almost no Portuguese, but I speak a little bit of Spanish. So when I'm in Portugal, because I do some work in Lisbon, when I'm here in Brazil, every morning I get up, I wake up, and I look in the mirror, and I say, don't say buenos dias, say bom dia. Don't say gracias, say obrigado. When I see Brazilians in the United States, and particularly Brazilians who come to Penn State University, what I say is bem-vindo. So I am very happy to be here, and I thought we would start off having just a little bit of fun before I start doing the academic work. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. This will not take a long time. You've already heard something about my academic background, and I have this on the chart. Don't pay attention to anything except the very bottom line. I was not always a law professor. I was a soldier for 6 years in the United States Army, the United States Army Infantry, before I became a professor of law. And I think that being a soldier actually helped me be a better law professor. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's the case. But beyond professional credentials, as you've heard, I was the dean of a law school in Washington, the Catholic University of America. And when you become dean of the law school, you have to take a formal official portrait. Now, I knew a long time ago, I learned a long time ago, that I am not a very good-looking person. I had the very best photographer in
O melhor
Washington.
fotógrafo de
She took this photograph. This is my official portrait as dean of the law school. This is an oil well, an oil and natural gas well in the state of Texas in the United States. You can see me in both of those photographs. One is where we are drilling the oil well, and the other is after we've completed the oil well, what we call our storage tanks. That's me walking down the staircase to the storage tanks. In the United States, it is permissible under United States law for ordinary people like me to own an oil well. I own this oil well. It's not doing very well right at the moment, but it did produce oil and gas for a number of years. I will talk about that a little bit later.
Nobody expected it. There was an intelligence failure, if you want to talk about military things. The Arab countries attacked, Israel pushed back, but for the first time in world history, the Arab countries decided to use oil as a political weapon. These are just some maps of the military operations during the Yom Kippur War. The Egyptians coming across the Sinai, the Syrians and Jordanians coming across the Golan Heights. But as you know, Israel pushed them back. They still have the six-day war borders. But as the war was going on, OPEC, the Organization of Arab oil-producing countries, decided to fight back with oil. So they decided to embargo, that is, to stop all shipments of crude oil to the United States. We didn't think anything about this. We did not realize how much oil we were taking from the Middle East. And it got very serious. What these slides are articles from the Washington Post that were written each day in 1973 and 1974 that I'm talking about. Because when I talk now, I find a lot of people simply either don't remember this or weren't alive when all of this happened. But the Arab countries declared the embargo. The embargo to the United States became total, a complete cutoff of oil to the United States. And then we ran out of oil. We didn't have enough. And we started having very serious problems driving our cars, operating our buses. We didn't realize how dependent on oil we had been. Americans, as you know, love cars. We drive every place. And we've been in love with cars for probably almost 100 years. And when you can't get gasoline, petrol, for your car, it's a very, very bad thing in the United States. So we actually had people fighting at the gas pump to get gasoline for their car. We actually had people killing each other at the gas pump for gasoline. And what was really, really bad, as you know, in the United States, Christmas is one of our most important holidays. It's a very important day. It's one of my favorite days. And on Christmas, what we like to do is we like to drive to see our families. And of course, we drive all over the country. But Christmas 1973, because we had no gasoline, Americans could not drive home to see their families for Christmas. And that was one of the worst things that's ever happened. So what do we do? This is what happened specifically. The price of crude oil went from approximately $4 or $5 a barrel to $16 a barrel in just about 3 months. Price quadrupled in 3 months. Gasoline price doubled and then tripled. These prices look kind of funny now, but back in 1973-74, they were really, really important. And we not only had problems with price of oil and gasoline, but we also had problems with shortages of gasoline and oil. And crude oil is really important, well beyond automobiles. We could not have a pharmaceutical industry in the world without crude oil. We could not have a plastics industry in the world without crude oil. So it's not just for cars. It's not just for driving home for Christmas. It's for a lot of other things. And we did not have enough. So our Congress, the United States Congress, got into it, and the Congress passed a statute called the Emergency Petroleum Allocation Act, where we tried to control oil prices, and we also tried to fix it so that oil got distributed fairly around the country. This is the EPAA. And what Congress was trying to do was protect the public. We wanted to maintain public services like bus transportation. We were especially concerned with oil and gasoline for agriculture. And we wanted whatever shortages to be spread equally around the country. Well, that was the EPAA. Congress was trying to do the right thing, but it didn't work. It was a total failure. I don't know how it is here in Brazil, and I'm not sure how you're thinking about government price controls, but in the United States, we know that one of the things the government just cannot do, the government does not do well, the government should not do, is control prices. The EPAA tried to control prices, and it was a total failure. President Reagan finally in 1981 abolished the price controls. The prices actually went down. We had oil in the United States, but our biggest mistake, our very biggest mistake was we did not learn the lesson of the Arab oil embargo. As soon as oil prices went down, we forgot about energy policy. And this is where I want everybody here, I want the people in Brazil to start thinking about this little slogan that I have. The time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. The time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. The sun has been shining for United States energy policy for about 35 years, and we haven't done very much. So I'm here to tell you that I wish I could give you a very beautiful picture of United States energy policy, but I'm here to tell you we haven't done nearly enough. So let's look at some of the things we've done right, some of the things we've done maybe not so well. What I'm going to talk to you about are some recent things in energy activity, energy policy, oil and gas production in fragile environments, Deepwater Horizon, Fukushima, a few others. And I'm going to start with a topic that I hope is very, very important here in Brazil, and that is extraction or production of crude oil and natural gas from fragile or harsh environments. Take a look at this photograph. This is California, 1910. We had no regulation of oil wells back then. You could simply dig a hole, and if you got oil out, great. And this is what our California oil fields looked like almost roughly 100 years ago. No government regulation, and everything was a mess. This is simply another photograph. It's a forest of derricks. And this is exactly what you should not do when you are trying to get oil out of the ground in a proper fashion. Well, fragile environments. We have a fragile environment in the United States. It's the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. This map, I just want you to see to make sure that everybody knows how we relate to the state of Alaska from what we call the lower 48. Alaska is one of our largest states. It's also one of our smallest states in terms of population, but it is very rich in resources. And this is, in the state of Alaska, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Lots of polar bears, some indigenous people, lots of flora and fauna that are very important to us, but also, as we know, very rich in oil and natural gas. So the question has become in the United States, should we drill for oil and natural gas in a region like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? This is the state of Alaska. Over almost 2 million square kilometers. The state of South Carolina, which I use as an example, is 82,000 square kilometers. ANWR, the region itself, is 78,000 square kilometers. Brazil, much larger, as you can see, more than 3 million square kilometers. But you get a sense of the state of Alaska as it compares with the country of Brazil. Not quite half the size. The wilderness areas that we set up in the United States are supposed to have no commercial development. That is the definition of wilderness area, and ANWR is a wilderness area. Oil and gas development is a commercial activity, which is normally supposed to be forbidden. So the question becomes, do we go into these fragile areas and drill for oil and natural gas, or do we leave them alone? We know how to do it. We have a lot of oil and gas that already comes out of Alaska. This is an oil well where we are permitting oil and gas development right in the middle of winter. No problem. We know how to drill in winter conditions. One of the things I'm going to talk about this evening is energy transportation. It's very important when you think about energy policy, not just to think about producing energy, making energy. You've got to think about getting the energy to where it can be used, energy transportation. And again, when we think about energy policy, this is one of the things that we don't think enough about. We built a pipeline in Alaska for Alaskan crude oil. This is the so-called TAPS pipeline, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. It runs 800 miles, roughly 1,200 kilometers from north part of Alaska, where we get the oil, down to Juneau, Alaska, where the oil is then put on ships to be sent elsewhere in the United States and elsewhere in the world. Remember fragile environments? It's not just snow. Can you see the photograph and see how we have the pipeline up above the ground? For two reasons. One is the ground there in Alaska is what we call permafrost. Permafrost. It is earth that is permanently frozen. And we don't want the permafrost to melt. When you transport oil, it is very hot. It builds up a great deal of heat. And if we had the oil pipeline simply laying on the ground or under the ground, it would melt the permafrost, which we do not want. But there's another reason. We have the pipeline elevated because crossing the pipeline's path are some very important animals in Alaska. In Europe, the animals are called reindeer. In the United States and Canada, we call the animals caribou. And the caribou migrate across the pipeline's path. So what we have done is we've raised the pipeline even more than you see here, so that the caribou can cross underneath it. So that transporting oil and gas does not adversely affect caribou migration. These are the problems we face in Alaska. You're facing some similar problems, similar, not identical, similar problems here in Brazil. Drilling for oil and natural gas in fragile environments. We have not mastered this. We still don't know what we should do about oil and natural gas in Alaska. One of the things we have not done is we have not done anything with natural gas in Alaska. The oil pipeline carries only oil. So for 40 years, what we have been doing with our natural gas in Alaska is simply burning it. When it comes out of the ground, we set it on fire. This is a very valuable natural resource, and we simply burn it. It's like taking a $20 bill and using it to light your cigarette. Now we're aware that natural gas is very valuable. Now we are aware that we should do something with it. So what we are now thinking about is a natural gas pipeline from Alaska to the United States, which is this map. But we still have not answered the question. Should we drill in ANWR? Congress is still debating. This is the Outer Continental Shelf. And this is something that I know is of particular concern now for Brazil, because you are discovering more and more natural gas in deep water settings. A lot of people don't know what the Outer Continental Shelf is. It's partly a geologic definition, and it's partly a definition in international law. This map is the Outer Continental Shelf outside or surrounding the United States. This is geologically the Outer Continental Shelf. And you'll notice it's not a fixed distance. It's not like what we used to refer to as the old 12-mile limit. It's a geological concept where the continental shelf exists to the continental slope, and then you have the deep ocean. Most countries have jurisdiction over the continental shelf, as we do here in the United States and as you do in Brazil. We have a lot of oil and gas on the continental shelf, what we call OCS, oil and gas. It is now 30% of all the oil produced in the United States and almost 13% of all the natural gas in the United States. And lots of jobs. 250,000 jobs are connected with Outer Continental Shelf oil and gas in the United States. We're having some problems with employment. These are very, very good very good jobs. But Deepwater Horizon, the single worst environmental disaster in United States history. BP operated an oil well offshore Louisiana and Texas. Something happened on the platform. There was an explosion and a fire. This is the fire as it was taking place on the platform. This is a photograph of the fire boats trying to put out the fire. They could not do so. They could not put out the fire. The platform collapsed. 11 people were killed. 11 platform workers were killed. And what it gave us was the largest oil spill in American history. This is a bird just on the coast of Texas that was covered up with oil from the Deepwater Horizon spill. You all know what very harmful environmental effects you get from spilled oil. This is a map of the oil spill. This is the state of Florida, the state of Texas, the state of Louisiana. The oil spill covered all of the area on this map within the red line. You can see how large it was. Millions of gallons of crude oil spilled into the water without control. What did we do? Well, for a very short time, we stopped oil and gas operations. But President Obama realized very quickly that we were getting 30% of our oil from outer continental shelf, so we couldn't stop it. So the temporary moratorium was lifted. Our government sometimes seems almost like a joke. And so one of the ways our government decided to deal with the oil spill was simply change the name of the government agency that regulated offshore oil and gas. It used to be the Minerals Management Service. It is now called the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement. Same people, same laws, same administrative rules. We just changed the name, and we think that fixed the problem. Well, it did not. BP paid a fine, several hundreds of millions of dollars, but that doesn't reflect much more than about 1 month of profit for BP. And BP is now back in the Gulf producing crude oil, as are all the other oil companies. So think about that. There is a great deal of offshore oil and gas offshore Brazil. And I hope that Brazil does not make the same mistakes we have made in developing our oil and gas offshore industry. There are lots of lessons to be learned here, partly by way of how you regulate, partly by way of how you watch the people who regulate, partly by way of how you fine companies when they do something bad, which we do not do very well. And I commend this to your attention, because as you start developing offshore resources, these are the problems that Brazil will face. This is fracking. The proper name is hydraulic fracturing, and this is where we're getting all of our new natural gas, so-called shale gas. This particular drawing just shows you how we get it out of the ground. You do what we call horizontal drilling, and you pull it up. Once again, we have the technology. This is not a technological problem. Remember, I told you when I first started talking that I own an oil and gas well? Fracking is very, very popular in the United States because if you own some land, you can give permission to a company to come onto your land and take off natural gas. And you can make a lot of money from it. A private citizen can make a lot of money from so-called fracking. This is what a fracking operation looks like when you're first drilling the well. Not very big, not very noisy. This happens to be fracking in my home state of Colorado. This is where fracking is taking place in the United States. All the pink areas are places where we are now getting natural gas where we didn't know there was natural gas even 10 years ago. And notice it covers almost the entire map of the United States. So if you own land in the United States, you may well be sitting on top of natural gas, which you can get out and make money from. I wanted to show you this picture in particular. This is fracking in the state of Pennsylvania, not very far, only a few miles from the Penn State campus. We have in energy policy a slogan that we call NIMBY. In English, it stands for not in my backyard, not in my backyard. So nuclear power plant, NIMBY, not in my backyard, no nuclear power plant in my backyard. Hydroelectric facility, probably not in my backyard. But a natural gas well that I own, yes, in my backyard. Do you see all these really nice houses that are surrounding the facility? Those are the people who own the natural gas well, and they are making lots and lots of money from that natural gas. So when it comes to fracking, it's okay to be in my backyard. I make a lot of money from it. You see all those nice houses surrounding the well? Those are the people who own the well. But fracking is not perfect. Once again, if you start doing shale gas in Brazil, and I'm sorry, I should have checked into this and I did not have time, but if there's shale gas in Brazil and you want to exploit it, you need to be very careful. A lot of environmental disruption, surface disruption, and particularly problems with water. One of the major problems in the 21st and 22nd century is going to be water, not energy, but water. And what we know now is that fracking uses lots and lots of water. Problems of ownership and control. We don't know what to do with the waste that comes out of the well, things like that. But if you own land in the United States and it's sitting on top of natural gas, you can make a lot of money. You can have it in your backyard. So fracking, as you can see, is very, very popular. Transportation of oil and natural gas, transportation of energy, really important. We have a lot of talk in the United States about oil pipelines. This is a map of the oil pipelines in the United States. It covers the map. We have oil pipelines all over the place. We have natural gas pipelines all over the place. But what we are worried about in the United States right now is the so-called Keystone Pipeline. This is the pipeline that will take what we used to call tar sand oil from Canada, melt it, essentially liquefy it, and bring it through a pipeline to the United States. And if we do this, it will come through the so-called Keystone Pipeline, which President Obama is thinking about approving. He has not approved it yet. We don't know what's going to happen. The interesting thing is, as you can see on this map, we already have an oil pipeline from exactly that place in Canada to the United States. This would simply be a second pipeline. The Canadians want it, although some people in Canada are opposed. The United States wants it. Excuse me, it's very controversial in the United States. I don't know exactly what we want. But when you think about making your energy policy, one of the things you need to think about is what we call energy independence. If that is your policy goal, we want our country, we want Brazil to be energy independent, then notice a lot of things fall into place. And notice here, if we get this oil pipeline, now granted this is Canada and the United States, but we've been friends for more than 200 years, Canada and the US, we've never fought a war. The border is undefended. This would make us energy independent. We would not have to buy oil from anybody else in the world if we had this pipeline. So notice, if your goal is energy independence, that says something about whether you approve the pipeline or not. But I don't know what's going to happen. This is Keystone Pipeline. Energy transportation is just as important as energy production. These are some figures from Keystone. We already get a lot of oil from Canada. Canada's our major trading partner. Like I say, it would make us energy independent if we took the oil, and you already know all of that. But my next question, Is nuclear power the answer? We're not sure in the United States. But look at world nuclear energy. 430 power reactors in 31 countries. These nuclear reactors produce almost 14% of world electricity. 16 countries get more than 25% of their electricity from nuclear. France, for example, gets 75% of all of its electricity from nuclear power. So is nuclear the answer? This is a map. This is a map of nuclear power around the world. The bright green countries are countries that have active nuclear policies, that is, active nuclear power plants. Notice Brazil is bright green. But I want to tell you about 3 accidents. We call them accidents. A lot of it was human failure, a lot of it was bad regulation. But in 1979, we had a nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. Nothing bad happened. This is a photograph of 3 Mile Island, about 80 miles from Washington, D.C., where I live. And we had an accident within the power plant, but nothing else. As we say, nobody died at 3 Mile Island, but it scared the daylights out of everybody in the United States. Nuclear power frightens almost everyone in the world, partly because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, partly because of some of the things that have happened since. This is Chernobyl, the second accident, 1986. This time people did die. Different from the United States, the then Soviet Union put their nuclear power plants in simply factory buildings with no special protections. The roof of the Chernobyl power plant blew off, and a huge amount of radioactive gas floated up into the atmosphere and over towards Western Europe. Lots and lots of problems from Chernobyl. This is Fukushima, 2011. Not an internal accident, but rather a tsunami. A tidal wave that covered up the power plant, started a fire, as you can see here, and caused all sorts of problems in Japan. This is the Fukushima fire from offshore, a photograph taken from offshore. And this is my favorite Fukushima photograph. This is a Fukushima dog. He lived right next to the power plant. You can see how frightened he is. And he is being examined for how radioactive he is. We did tests on dogs for radioactivity. That's how frightened we were in Fukushima. What has happened since then? Germany says it's giving up all of its nuclear power. Japan said it was giving up all nuclear power, but has since, I think, changed its mind at least a little bit. So I don't know where we're going there. But if you do nuclear power, very important considerations. Very expensive to build, the new power plant. Very important to think about what you do with high-level nuclear waste. And nuclear power plants have a lifetime, 40 or 50 years. How do you shut down old nuclear power plants? Very important consideration. But don't give up on nuclear. There are some things that are happening that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. We are starting to design and build better reactors. This is one. This is the AP1000 reactor built by the Westinghouse Company in the United States that is small, much different from the old reactors, much safer, and much less expensive. The AP1000. This is another diagram of the AP1000, just to give you an example of what it looks like. But there's something else happening in nuclear that I want to call to your attention. It's an entirely different technique. This is the molten salt reactor. This is a diagram of molten salt, but I want to talk to you just a little bit, just in words, about what it does. It runs on thorium, not uranium or plutonium. Thorium is much more plentiful and much less dangerous than uranium or plutonium. Thorium is not under pressure, which is part of the problem in a nuclear power plant. You don't need cooling towers. Remember, That photograph of 3 Mile Island, those are the cooling towers, which you need to take away the heat from the reactor core. With a thorium reactor, an MSR reactor, you don't need that. 1 pound of thorium produces as much power as 300 pounds of uranium or 3.5 million pounds of coal. 1 nuclear power plant produces the equivalent of 1,200 windmills, and nuclear power plants have almost 0 carbon emissions. If in Brazil you're worried about global warming, as we are in the United States, and you worry about global warming by way of worrying about carbon emissions, nuclear power plants have 0 carbon emissions. Coal. What do we do with coal? In the United States, we can't live without it. Almost 40% of our electricity comes from coal. But there's some interesting things happening in coal. This is the Texas Clean Energy Project, where we take coal and turn it into natural gas. We've known this technology for 70 years. The Germans did it during World War II. It's very expensive, but the United States is sitting on 250 years of coal. We will never run out. And so remember again, if one of your goals for your energy policy is energy independence, can Brazil be energy independent? Can the United States be energy independent? You have to think about coal. Expensive, but we have a lot of it, and we could be independent that way, if you want to do it. Renewable energy. How do we promote renewable energy? Lots of different possibilities. I will go through this fairly quickly. We do tax benefits in the United States. We have loan guarantees. We fund research on renewable energy, but we also let the market take care of a lot. In the US, we still have only a small percentage of energy coming from renewables, but it's growing. We had a problem. This is the Solyndra bankruptcy. The United States government gave this company a loan guarantee of $535 million, and then the company went bankrupt. The government gives them a loan guarantee for $500 million, the company goes bankrupt, we lose all of that money. So we are starting to think about whether loan guarantees are a good way to promote renewable energy. Efficiency and conservation. An idea that people don't talk about enough. The more you save, the better off you are. And efficiency and conservation is about saving energy, not producing energy. So we talk a lot in the United States about efficiency and conservation. We talk about it by way of what we call the smart grid, which is the intelligent electrical system that we're trying to develop. Smart grid is supposed to heal itself. It's supposed to resist terrorist attack. It's supposed to have greater reliability. And it's supposed to permit people, just ordinary citizens, to make decisions about their energy consumption. Efficiency and conservation. These are some of the experimental developments that I wanted you to think about. This is ocean thermal energy conversion. We know, or at least we believe we know, there's not actually one in existence, that we can use the differential heat in the ocean to make electricity. This is what one of the plants would look like if we built one. This is space-based solar power. We go into outer space, collect the sun's rays there. They don't get interfered with by clouds or anything like that, and we transmit the electricity to Earth. This is high altitude wind systems where we have a turbine way up in the atmosphere that sends the electricity all the way down to the ground and into the transmission grid. Nuclear fusion, we're working on that, but we haven't completed it. We don't know where fusion is going. But here's my suggestion. If you're working on an energy policy for the 21st and 22nd century, don't just think big, also think small. I teach, as you know, at the University of Dundee, the Energy Law Centre at Dundee in Scotland, And there I have my students write various research papers. And one of the questions I ask them to think about is energy a human right? Is energy a human right? We have a lot of research on water, and most people believe that water is a human right. But is energy a human right? If you believe that energy is a human right, what you want to do is think small. Large-scale hydro facilities? No. I don't think we'll see many more of those in our lifetimes. I don't think we'll see large-scale hydro in the 21st and 22nd century. But this is small-scale hydro. This is what we call a run-of-river development, where you don't build a dam, you simply take the water out for a while, run it through an electric producing facility, and then put it back into the river. That's small-scale hydro. Think small. We have, as you know, in the United States, Native Americans. We call them Indians. A lot of them live on reservations in the United States. This is a photograph from the Sioux, Lakota Sioux Indian Reservation in South Dakota. The Lakota Sioux were very brave warriors. They killed Colonel Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and they've had lots of economic problems. But this is thinking small. This is a single wind turbine, one wind turbine on the Lakota Reservation that produces energy exclusively for the tribal radio station. They don't need anything else. The wind blows out in South Dakota all the time, powers the turbine powers the radio station. Think small. Think small with regard to biogas. This is a photograph from India. And if you believe that energy is a human right, one of the things you have to think about is how common people, how poor people can get energy. Biogas is a possible answer. This is a household biogas facility. It produces enough power, enough energy for the home, for heating, and for cooking, and for electricity, for lighting. This is a diagram of biogas. You take cow dung, you mix it with water, you put it into the digester. Out comes energy, and out the other side comes usable fertilizer, cleaner manure. Sounds kind of not so nice, a little bit smelly, but biogas, cheap, efficient, no major environmental problems, and you think small. You bring electricity to the people who need it, thinking small. Where are we? In the United States, we will probably be the largest oil producer in the world by the year 2016. We are now already the largest producer of natural gas in the world. With regard to crude oil, we're producing really more than we need. Crude oil imports in the United States are falling drastically. Natural gas, again, we are drowning in natural gas. So once again, a lot of these things are affecting how we think about oil, about energy policy. Coal, we can't get rid of it. It produces 40% of our electricity, but we are trying to move away from coal. Alternative energy, we're doing better, but not very well. Global warming. The United States is actually doing fairly well in terms of cutting back carbon emissions. But the central question is, can the developing countries can the developed countries force the developing countries to cut back on their carbon emissions? Can the United States tell Brazil to stop all major manufacturing activity because of your carbon emissions, just because we are worried about global warming? Notice the impact that's going to have on the Brazilian economy, on the economy of lots of other countries in the world. As we say in law school, the jury is out on that question. We don't have an answer yet. But I'll finish here. These are my suggestions for the ingredients for an energy policy. you can't focus on just one. You have to look at multiple forms of energy. You should try to minimize cost to consumers. In the United States, we believe strongly in the market. We believe market mechanism is the right way to go. But we have to also harmonize energy and environment, and we haven't done all that well on that. Keeping energy and environment constantly in our consciousness. We have to have in the United States, because we have a federal government, we have to have a role for states and for citizen participation. And we want to promote entrepreneurial activities, inventions, engineering, that sort of thing. So this is where we stand. I hope I've given you some things to think about. The way we'd like to handle the rest of the program this evening is I will stop talking. I will ask our faculty members here on the panel to make some comments, ask questions, and then we will have questions from those of you sitting in the audience. So I will now shut up, I will sit down, and we will have some comments by our panelists.